Go ahead, judge me, but ask yourself one thing first. If your husband started changing in front of you after 12 years, would you just smile and let him walk out of your life? I was not trying to destroy Daniel. I was trying to save my marriage before his new job convinced him he did not need one. People call what I did cruel, but I call it control, and every family needs someone brave enough to hold the line. He was calm that week, too calm, the same way he always got when he wanted me to think he had given up. By Monday morning, HR would finally understand what kind of man I lived with. My name is Megan Carter. I am 38, and I manage marketing campaigns for people who pretend they do not need control while paying me to build it for them. Of course, people call me cruel now, because people always hate the woman who admits what every wife is already doing in softer words. I was not trying to destroy Daniel. I was trying to save my marriage before his new job convinced him he did not need one. He was calm that week, too calm, the same way he always got when he wanted me to think he had nothing left to say. By Monday morning, HR would finally understand what kind of man I lived with. Daniel and I had been married 12 years, and for most of that time, I knew where I stood. He was an engineer, careful with money, careful with words, careful with every feeling until it looked almost empty from the outside. I was the one who made the house warm. I chose the curtains, remembered birthdays, kept his mother from feeling forgotten, made sure we did not become one of those silent couples who eat dinner like two strangers sharing a table. Every Friday before his promotion, he used to bring home Thai food from the place near the pharmacy, because one winter night, 8 years earlier, I had cried in the car and said the smell reminded me of our first apartment. That was real. I will not pretend it was not. He had good hands, quiet hands, the kind that fixed loose cabinet doors and carried laundry baskets without being asked. But quiet hands do not hold a wife when she is disappearing. They just repair the room around her. The first sign was the shirts. Not expensive ones, not even dramatic, just better. Blue cotton instead of grey polos. A belt that matched his shoes. He bought them without me. That may sound small to you, but small things tell the truth first. A man who asks his wife which shirt looks better is still inside the marriage. A man who buys 3 by himself has already started imagining a mirror without her standing behind him. Then came the gym. Thursdays, mostly. He said it helped his back. Of course it did. Men always find useful reasons for becoming interesting again. He would leave after work with a small black bag and come home with his hair damp, his face calmer, his shoulders sitting higher under those new shirts. I counted it the second week. 1 Thursday, 2 Thursdays, 3. By the 4th, I asked if there was someone at the gym he wanted to impress. He looked at me from the hallway holding that bag and asked softly why every change had to mean someone else. Soft curiosity. That was Daniel's way. He never came at you directly. He made a question sound reasonable, and somehow you were supposed to feel silly for noticing your own life shifting. I told him the problem was not the gym. The problem was secrecy. He said there was no secrecy. I heard the pause before he said it. I told him pauses were where men hid things. He went calm then. Not angry. Calm. His face closed in that flat engineer way, like he had moved me from wife to problem. I hated that calm more than shouting. Shouting at least proves a man is still reachable. Calm means he has left the room while his body is still standing there. My mother understood before anyone else did. Linda had been married to my father for 40 years, and she had kept him through layoffs, drinking spells, bad investments, and one secretary who used to call the house after 9. My mother always said a marriage survives because one person has the spine to steer it. She did not call that manipulation. She called it maintenance. When I told her Daniel had corrected me in front of her during Sunday dinner, she set her fork down slowly. He had not even corrected me about something important. I said he had been distant because of work, and he said, very politely, that he was tired because he was trying to finish a mortgage review. Mortgage review. 2 words, dropped like nothing. Then he changed the subject when I asked what mortgage. My mother watched him do it. Later, while Daniel washed dishes like a guest trying to earn good manners, she told me that a confident man is a man who has been allowed to feel too safe. She said work had become his private country. If I wanted him back inside the marriage, work had to stop feeling like an escape. I did not decide at once. I am not stupid. I understand consequences better than most people because my job is consequences. One word in the wrong place can make a product feel cheap. One image can make a brand look guilty. People think control is loud, but real control is placement. So I placed concern where it would be heard. The next morning, I bought a second SIM card at a phone shop next to a dry cleaner. Cash. No drama. No big plan written down like some foolish woman in a movie. Just a small card, a folded receipt, and my hand closing around both. At home, I stood in the front hallway for a while, where the afternoon light came through the narrow window beside the door. Above it, Daniel's little white security camera blinked once. He had installed those cameras the year packages kept disappearing from our porch. I used to tease him that protecting cardboard boxes was the most heroic thing he had done in years. That camera had become part of the house to me, like the smoke detector or the ugly brass hook where he kept his keys. I did not think about it. Why would I? The house was mine. The hallway was mine. The story I was trying to save was mine too. I called his company's HR line from the second phone and used the voice women use when they want to be believed but not remembered. I said I was a neighbor. I said I did not want trouble. I said I heard things sometimes, raised voices, heavy sounds, a woman crying maybe, and I worried about what happened after the blinds closed. I never said Daniel had done anything specific. That matters. I gave them concern, not a statement. I gave them smoke, not fire. If they smelled danger, that was because danger already lived somewhere in the pattern. My hand was steady until the woman from HR asked for my name. Then I let my breath catch. I said I could not get involved. I ended the call before she could make me smaller with questions. Afterward, I stood in that hallway with the little white camera above me and felt the house settle around my shoulders like a coat. Of course I was afraid. Any wife would be afraid if her husband started building a life with closed doors, new shirts, locked papers, and Thursday nights she was not invited into. I was only doing what my mother had done for 40 years. I was pulling the leash before he reached the street. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He had his work bag in one hand and a white envelope in the other, the kind he always used for documents he did not want bent. When I asked what it was, he said it was nothing I needed to worry about yet. Yet. That word sat between us. I smiled because smiling is what a woman does when she is deciding how patient to be. He looked tired, but not guilty. That annoyed me more. He kissed my cheek, missed the corner of my mouth, and went toward his office. Then he paused under the hallway camera and looked up at it for half a second, like he had heard a sound. I almost asked what he was doing. Instead, I watched him unlock his office and close the door behind him. 1 door, 2 phones, 3 Thursdays. By morning, someone else would be asking the questions. The first sign that my plan had worked came 2 days later, when Daniel came home before 6 and did not take off his shoes right away. That was not his habit. My husband had systems for everything. Shoes by the bench, keys on the ugly brass hook, work bag beside the office door. But that evening he stood in the hallway with his keys still in his hand, looking at the floor like the wood had asked him a question. I was in the living room folding towels I had already folded once because a wife needs a reason to be nearby without looking like she waited. He said HR had called him in that afternoon. He said someone had made a concern report. He said it was probably nothing, but the word probably came out too careful. Of course, I did not rush to comfort him. Comfort too soon teaches a man that fear can be survived without changing. I asked what kind of concern. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his keyring and said it was vague. Noise. Arguments. Someone worried about the home. I let my face go still, the way I did in client meetings when a bad campaign finally found its problem. Then I asked if there was any reason someone would think that. He looked at me then. Not hard, not angry, just tired. He asked softly if I really believed that question belonged to him. That was Daniel again, turning the room into a puzzle where he was the only reasonable adult. I told him a woman was allowed to ask for safety without being cross-examined in her own house. He went calm. That clean, flat calm. The same calm he used when he wanted the argument to die before I got the last word. I watched it settle over him and felt something warm open in my chest. For the first time in months, he looked like a man who remembered he had something to lose. By dinner, he was quieter than usual. He cut the chicken into small pieces and barely touched the salad. I said maybe this was a good time for him to reconsider those Thursday gym nights, because when a family was under stress, disappearing after work sent the wrong message. He said the gym was not disappearing. I said it was not about the gym. It was about priorities. He started to answer, then stopped and looked toward the hallway. The little white camera blinked above the front door, ordinary and useless, and he stared at it for 1 second too long. I almost laughed. Engineers always look at objects when they do not know how to look at people. The next morning, I asked for his phone password. I did not demand it. Demands make men defensive. I framed it as rebuilding trust. I said if HR had been contacted, then appearances mattered now, and a husband with nothing to hide should want his wife calm. He asked when my calm had become his assignment. Soft again. Careful again. I told him that was exactly the kind of cold sentence that made women feel alone. That worked. His face changed, not much, just around the mouth. He gave me the password. Of course he did. Daniel had never been strong when I made the issue moral. 1 day, 2 days, 3. I checked his messages, his work chats, his photos, his calendar. There was no woman. That should have relaxed me, but it only made the closed office feel larger. If there was no woman, then the problem was him. His confidence, his private thoughts, his new life forming without a name I could hate. On Thursday, he came home with the gym bag again, and I told him dinner with my mother mattered more than his back exercises. He looked at the bag, then at me, and said he had already cancelled. I heard defeat. It sounded clean. My mother came over with lemon cake, and that bright, satisfied face she wore when one of her old rules proved itself. She said men respond to pressure from institutions because they think institutions are fathers. I did not like the way she said fathers while my own father sat quietly at her table every Sunday, but I understood the lesson. Daniel was not afraid of my tears anymore. He was afraid of a file with his name on it. That weekend we had a barbecue at his co-worker's house, a neat backyard with string lights, paper plates, and women who smiled like they did not watch their husbands too. Daniel stayed close to the grill, talking to a man from his department about some machine failure I did not care about. He looked almost normal there, which annoyed me. So when one of the wives asked how the promotion was treating us, I gave a small laugh and said Daniel had been a little intense lately, but we were managing. Not dangerous, not violent, just intense. The word landed exactly where I placed it. The wife's smile tightened. The man beside her stopped chewing for half a second. Daniel heard it. I know he did, because he turned his head. Not fast, not guilty, just enough. Then he did something strange. He did not correct me. He did not ask me to step aside. He only set down the tongs, wiped his hands on a napkin, and looked around the yard as if he were counting who had heard. I read that as humiliation. A man only counts witnesses when he knows they have seen him lose. On the drive home, he finally spoke. He said I had called him intense in front of people who reported to the same leadership chain. Specific. Factual. Very Daniel. I told him if one word could damage him, maybe the problem was not the word. He asked why I wanted people to be unsure of him. I said I wanted people to understand what I carried at home. He went quiet after that, and the quiet felt like a door closing from his side. Good, I thought. Close it. Lock yourself in. At least then I know where you are. On Sunday morning, he said the cameras had been glitching and he needed to update the firmware. He stood on a chair in the hallway with a small screwdriver between his teeth, his shirt lifting at the back, looking so ordinary I almost softened. Then I remembered the blue shirts, the Thursdays, the locked office, the word yet. I told my mother over the phone that my home IT guy had finally found a way to be useful. She laughed, and I laughed too. Daniel glanced down from the camera, calm as ever, and said nothing. By Monday, he was careful with every sentence. By Tuesday, he stopped arguing with me in front of anyone. By Wednesday, I had his phone, his Thursdays, and the first public doubt planted around his name. That is what people do not understand. Control does not arrive like a storm. It comes back piece by piece, like furniture being moved into the correct room. By the end of that week, Daniel's promotion was approved anyway. That was the part that made me understand how protected men like him could be when they wore calm like a clean shirt. HR had spoken to him, asked their careful questions, written their careful notes, and still decided he was stable enough to move forward. Stable. That word kept repeating in my head while I sat in my car outside the grocery store with a bag of melting frozen vegetables on the passenger seat. Stable was what people called a man when they had not watched him disappear from his own marriage piece by piece. Stable was what they called silence when it came from a man with a good title. Of course, Daniel did not celebrate loudly. He came home with a small box of pastries from the bakery near his office, the one I liked before they changed the cream filling, and said the promotion had been finalized. He said it gently, like he was offering peace. I heard victory. He put the box on the counter and watched my face with that calm again, as if he expected me to prove something. I smiled and told him I was happy for him because wives are supposed to clap when their husbands build ladders out of the marriage. Then I took one pastry, broke it in half, and left most of it on the plate. My mother said HR had failed because I had sounded like a stranger. A stranger could be dismissed. A wife could not. She came over the next afternoon wearing her pearl earrings, which meant she had decided this was serious work, not ordinary complaining. We sat in the living room where the late sun made the dust on the coffee table look worse than it was. The little white camera was above the doorway, angled toward the sofa and the front hall. I saw it. I truly did. But a camera in your own house does not feel like a witness. It feels like furniture with a red light. My mother asked me to practice the call before I made it. She said fear had to sound tired, not dramatic. She said women who sounded angry made people defensive, but women who sounded ashamed made people lean closer. I tried the first version too strong and she shook her head. I tried the second version softer, and she told me to breathe in the middle of the sentence. We both laughed because I overdid the breath and sounded like a bad actress in a charity commercial. That laugh mattered to no one. It was only nerves leaving the body. People laugh in hospitals too. It does not mean the pain is fake. I held the second phone in my hand and rehearsed again. This time I said I was his wife. I said I was worried about what stress was doing to him. I said he had become intense at home, that I was trying to protect the family, that I did not want to ruin his life but needed someone to understand the pressure before it became worse. I did not use one ugly word. I was careful. Careful is not the same as cruel. Between practice calls, my mother told me that if the company slowed his promotion or put him on leave, I had to use the moment well. She said fear made men agreeable for a small window, and during that window we should move the car into my name, adjust the account access, and make sure Daniel remembered who kept his home standing while he played important at work. I said the car was not the main issue. She said nothing is the main issue until you need it. That was my mother. Practical enough to sound heartless, experienced enough to be right. When I finally called HR as myself, I let my voice shake only twice. The woman on the line asked if I was in immediate danger. I said no, not like that, and then went quiet because silence makes people imagine the room for you. She asked if there were children in the home. I said we were a family and I was trying to keep it that way. Not a lie. Not really. The whole point was keeping it that way. When the call ended, my mother squeezed my knee and said I had done the hard part. I corrected her. I said I had done the loving part. That evening, Daniel came home and stood in the doorway between the hall and the living room, right beneath the camera. He looked at my mother, then at me, then at the folded blanket on the sofa where we had been sitting all afternoon. He asked if we had a good visit. Soft, polite, too polite. I told him my mother cared enough to show up when he was too busy building his new office life. He did not answer that. He only reached up and adjusted the camera with 2 fingers, barely moving it, like a man fixing a crooked picture frame. My mother gave me a quick look, but I rolled my eyes so she would not make it important. Daniel said the camera angle had been off since the update. Of course it had. He cared more about angles than conversations. Then, instead of retreating to his office, he asked if we could have dinner on Friday with my parents. He said he had also invited Mark and Sophie because Mark had known us since the early years, and it might be good to have people around who cared about the marriage. I almost pitied him. Poor Daniel, finally trying to build a bridge after I had already learned where to place the weight. I told him Friday was fine. I even said I would cook. If he needed witnesses to apologize properly, I was generous enough to give him a table. Friday became important before breakfast. I woke up earlier than usual and lay still while Daniel moved around the bathroom with that quiet routine of his. Water running, cabinet closing, the soft click of his watch on his wrist. He was careful in the mornings, always careful, like he believed good behavior could replace warmth. When he came out wearing one of the new blue shirts, I almost told him to change. Not because it looked bad, because it looked good. That was the problem. My husband had started looking like a man who belonged somewhere I had not been invited. He asked if I needed anything for dinner before he left. Soft. Practical. The kind of question that sounded like care if you did not know Daniel. I told him I had it handled. He said Mark and Sophie would bring wine, and my parents would arrive at 7. He said it as if we were hosting a normal dinner with normal people and not repairing the damage he had created by making me fight for basic security. Of course he could keep his voice even. Men like Daniel always look innocent when women are doing the emotional labor loudly. After he left, I cleaned the dining room twice. I wiped the same glass table until the reflection looked sharp enough to cut. The white camera over the hallway watched the front door, the living room, and just the edge of the dining room entrance. I saw it while carrying napkins past the sofa. I even stopped under it for a second because the little red light blinked and made me think the update had finally fixed whatever Daniel said was wrong with it. Then I moved on. A camera is only dangerous when you are hiding. I was not hiding. I was preparing. 1 table, 6 chairs, 7 o'clock, everything in its place. My mother called around noon, but her voice was different, slower. She asked if I was sure dinner was a good idea. That annoyed me more than if she had argued. She had been the one who taught me that a wife had to steer the house before the house steered her. Now, when the steering finally required both hands, she sounded as if she wanted to sit in the back seat. I told her Daniel was trying to make himself look reasonable in front of witnesses, and I was not afraid of witnesses. She said I should not repeat anything too specific about HR. I said I had never been careless. She went quiet. That silence was small, but I heard it. I told myself she was nervous because mothers worry when daughters handle serious things well. Daniel came home at 5 with flowers, not roses. White tulips, because years ago I had said roses looked like apologies men bought in grocery stores. That detail should have pleased me. Instead, it irritated me. He remembered flowers, but not how lonely I had been for months. He remembered tulips, but not that Thursday nights had started to feel like locked doors. I put them in a vase and set them on the sideboard where everyone could see he was trying. When I turned back, he was standing by the hallway near the camera again, watching me in that calm way. Then he asked if I truly believed he would ever make me unsafe. The question was not angry. That was worse. It came out tired, plain, almost bare. For half a second, I saw him not as a problem, not as a man growing too confident, but as Daniel from our first apartment, sitting on the floor with takeout containers because we did not own a table yet. He had loved me then in his clumsy way, fixing things, planning things, forgetting to say the words until I had already stopped waiting for them. The door opened a little in my mind. Not guilt, not regret, just a crack where another version of the story could breathe. Then I closed it. Sad men can make women feel responsible for the mess they created. I had seen my father do it for years, lowering his eyes until my mother looked like the cruel one for being strong. I told Daniel that unsafe did not always mean bruises or broken plates. Sometimes unsafe meant never knowing which part of your husband's life you were still allowed to enter. He looked down at the vase of tulips. He said he understood more than I thought. That was Daniel again, making one sentence do the work of a conversation. I told him understanding after damage was just another kind of lateness. He accepted that too. Calm. Too calm. By 7, my parents arrived first. My father kissed my cheek and held the lemon cake my mother made when she wanted a room to like her. He looked at Daniel longer than usual but said nothing. My mother touched my arm in the hallway and asked if I was all right. I smiled because she needed to see I was still leading. Mark and Sophie came 10 minutes later. Mark was tall, grey at the temples, with the serious face of a man who made every room feel like paperwork. I barely noticed him beyond that. He was Daniel's old friend, useful for nostalgia, not power. Sophie watched the table before she sat down. Women like that always watch before speaking. I placed Daniel at the far end, myself near the kitchen, my parents on one side, Mark and Sophie on the other. A wife knows how to stage a room. Dinner began politely. Too politely. Daniel kept his phone face down beside his plate, his thumb resting on its edge between bites. I thought it was nerves. I thought he was waiting for the right moment to ask everyone to help him look harmless. So I poured wine, smiled at my father, and let the room settle exactly where I wanted it. If Daniel needed an audience for his apology, I had given him one. Before anyone lifted a fork, I had already made sure the evening belonged to me. That is the part people leave out when they tell the story later, as if I wandered into Friday dinner and accidentally stepped over some invisible line. No, I knew exactly where the line was. I had watched Daniel get too comfortable again after HR approved his promotion, watched his shoulders rise, watched the new shirts keep appearing, watched that office door close with the same soft click every night. A wife can hear a lock even from another room. So earlier that afternoon, while the sauce was simmering and the dining room glasses were lined up like clean little witnesses, I used the second phone again. I did not call this time. Calls made people ask questions. Messages gave them something to reread when they wanted to protect themselves. I wrote from the number they already knew as the concerned neighbour and said the situation still worried me. I said I had heard more tension. I said the wife sounded scared but controlled, which was exactly how women sound when they have learned not to make things worse. Then, from my own email, I sent a short follow-up as Daniel's wife. Not dramatic, not messy. I said I appreciated their discretion, but I needed them to understand that stress at home was rising after the promotion process. I used the word rising because it sounded professional. Marketing teaches you that words do not need to shout if they know where to stand. After I pressed send, I placed the second phone in the junk drawer under the batteries and birthday candles. Then I stirred the sauce and tasted it twice. It needed salt. That was all. Daniel came home while I was setting the plates. He noticed the tulips on the sideboard, the clean table, the extra chair pulled out for Mark. He asked if we could speak before everyone arrived. His voice was quiet, but not weak. That irritated me. He said he knew I was scared, and he said he had been absent in ways he should have handled better. He said work had swallowed him, and he had let plans replace presence. That was the closest Daniel ever came to saying something real without wrapping it in a task list. I leaned against the counter and let him finish. He said we could still fix things if we stopped turning every fear into a weapon. I almost smiled at that. Men always discover emotional language when consequences reach their office. I told him the truth then, because even people who hate me should admit this part was true. I told him he had loved me like a project, not like a woman. He knew how to fix a cabinet, plan a mortgage, schedule a repair, and remember which Thai food I liked. But he did not know how to look at me before I had to become loud. He did not answer right away. For once, he had no clean correction, no soft question, no engineer sentence that made the problem smaller. He only stood there with his hand on the back of a dining chair, his thumb pressing into the wood. I saw that silence and knew I had hit the place he could not defend. Of course, being right about one thing made me stronger about the rest. That is how truth works inside a marriage. It opens the next door. He said, very carefully, that this was the last time he would ask me to speak privately before other people had to carry our business. He said if I wanted repair, this was the moment. If I wanted performance, he would not interrupt it. Performance. That word was ugly because it was almost clever. I told him not to dress up cowardice as dignity. I told him he only wanted privacy because witnesses made him nervous now. He looked past me toward the hallway where the white camera sat above the door with its tiny light steady and red. Then he looked back at me and went calm again. Not sad this time. Not tired. Calm in that clean, closed way. I read it as surrender. I had seen men do this in meetings when the room had already turned against them. They stopped arguing because arguing made the loss louder. He said he would handle things properly. Properly. Another Daniel word. Cold. Neat. Useless. I told him he should start by handling dinner like a husband who wanted people to believe him. Then the doorbell rang. My parents came first and my mother's smile looked painted on too quickly. I touched her arm in the hallway and said Daniel had just tried to control the conversation before anyone arrived. She glanced toward him, then toward the camera, then back at me. She only told me to be careful tonight. One sentence. No fire in it. No old confidence. I waited for more, for the usual sharp little rule that made me feel like I came from a line of women who survived men by staying smarter than them. Nothing came. She went to the dining room and started praising the tulips. I decided she was afraid because the plan was finally big enough to matter. That did not make the plan wrong. It made it serious. Mark and Sophie arrived with wine, and Daniel greeted them like a man pretending not to need help. My father sat quietly, turning his water glass in slow circles. Sophie watched me too much. Mark watched Daniel too little. None of that worried me. I had the HR report, the second message, the password, the cancelled Thursdays, the barbecue pause, and a room full of people who would see how reasonable I looked beside Daniel's silence. Dinner moved exactly how I wanted at first. I asked Mark about work. I complimented Sophie's earrings. I let my mother mention how stressful promotions could be on families. Daniel did not push back. He ate slowly. He kept his phone face down beside his plate. His thumb rested on the edge of it, still and ready, like he was holding himself back. I thought he was afraid of Monday. I thought HR had finally put enough weight on his name. By dessert, I planned to say that marriages needed transparency, and Daniel would either agree in front of everyone or expose himself by refusing. 1 table, 2 phones, 3 messages, everything in its place. Then Daniel lifted his glass, looked around the room and smiled. Daniel's smile was small, not happy, not kind, just calm finally finding its shape. He thanked everyone for coming, then said there was something we should hear before dessert because tomorrow morning HR would be calling me too. I laughed once, sharp enough that my mother looked at her plate. I told him not to turn dinner into one of his little engineering presentations. He did not answer me. He only placed his phone in the center of the table and pressed play. My own voice came out first. Not from HR, from our living room. My rehearsed breath. My soft, broken version of fear. Then my mother's voice telling me to pause longer because scared women sounded more believable when they were ashamed. Then both of us laughing. The room did not move. Forks stayed down. Sophie's hand stopped on her glass. My father looked at the tulips on the sideboard like they had become something indecent. The recording kept going. My voice said the company needed to understand pressure before it became worse. My mother said that after HR slowed him down, we should move the car into my name while Daniel was scared enough to agree. I reached for my wine, but my fingers touched the stem and stayed there. Daniel said the first report had already sounded wrong because no neighbour could hear our house clearly from 2 lots away. He said he had not defended himself loudly because he wanted to know if I would stop. Then he looked toward the hallway. The little white camera watched us with its red light steady. He said the cameras wrote to the cloud after the update. Mark had received copies 3 weeks ago. Mark gave one short nod, and I finally understood why he had watched Daniel too little. Daniel said the second SIM was not clean either. It was on our shared family plan, and the receipt had been in the household papers I gave him myself. I tried to speak. I said HR misunderstood. I said my mother and I were processing fear. Sophie asked why processing fear sounded like practicing it. No one helped me answer. Then Daniel opened the folder from his office. Inside were approved mortgage papers for the lake house I had wanted for years. The application date was 1 day before my first call. He said that was what the locked office had hidden. An anniversary surprise. My father stood up, lifted his chair and sat beside Daniel. My mother did not defend me. She left before coffee. Daniel sent HR a formal complaint packet and an attorney letter asking them to preserve the report history and call records. 2 weeks later, Daniel lived in the lake house alone. The car stayed in his name. Mark and Sophie stopped answering my messages. My mother told relatives she had only been worried about me. My own office heard enough to decide a marketing manager who weaponized a story could not be trusted with theirs. I still say I was trying to save the marriage. Maybe I was. But I thought control was the rope that kept Daniel close, and it became the line he used to measure the distance between us. The white camera stayed above the hallway door, blinking at an empty room. I built Daniel a new life by trying to trap him in the old one.